Today's story takes place in Keller, Texas, an affluent suburb nestled within the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. It was here, in 2011, that a man named Greg Williams had built a life many would consider the American dream. Greg was a successful self-made entrepreneur. He had built a multi-million-dollar IT company from the ground up, a testament to his intelligence and relentless work ethic. Greg had a reputation for being tough in business dealings. Some described him as feared, others as respected. His ex-wife, Kathy Williams, noted that while Greg had a temper and often prioritized work, he was a man who valued his family above all else, especially their daughter, Taylor. With the pressure of running a multi-million-dollar company and the loneliness he sometimes felt, Greg occasionally visited adult websites to take his mind off work and family. During one of these visits, he met a woman named Michele. At first, their conversations were nothing more than small talk, but soon they discovered little things in common: hobbies, jokes, and the feeling that they understood each other. Greg was intrigued by her openness, and she seemed drawn to his confidence and success. The more they talked, the more comfortable they became with each other. Eventually, Greg suggested they meet in person, and not long after, he invited her to join him at a swingers club. Curious and willing, she agreed, and together they took part in activities that marked the beginning of a relationship unlike anything Greg had experienced before. But there was one problem: Michele was still married. And for her, it wasn't the first time her love life had been tangled in lies and complications. It was a pattern that stretched back years. Michele was born in Hurst, Texas, alongside her younger sister Laura. Their father was unreliable, often chasing questionable schemes, and that instability seemed to shape the way Michele handled her own life. At just 17, she left high school after becoming pregnant. The baby's father was John Paul Ray, but Michele told another young man, Kenneth O'Brien, that the child was his. Kenneth, believing her, married Michele and even joined the military to provide for what he thought was his family. But the truth unraveled, and like many of Michele's future relationships, it ended in disappointment and lies. Her next serious relationship was with Brandon Dixon, a former high school classmate. They had 2 children together, but Brandon began noticing troubling patterns. Michele was still legally married to Kenneth while planning a future with Brandon. When confronted, she spun stories about being too afraid to divorce, painting herself as the victim. At the same time, she was working as a dental assistant until she was fired for theft. Instead of admitting the truth, she told Brandon she had started a telemarketing job at night. In reality, she was dancing at a topless bar. When Brandon found out, their relationship collapsed further. Suspecting infidelity, Brandon set up a tape recorder in their house and discovered that Michele had been unfaithful with 2 different men inside their home. His decision to divorce Michele was met with shocking retaliation. She destroyed his expensive saltwater fish collection and poisoned his dog. For those who knew her, it was a disturbing glimpse of how far she could go when she felt wronged. After Brandon, Michele circled back to John Paul Ray, the father of her first child. They were married for 8 years, but eventually, John too suspected she was cheating. His suspicions were confirmed when he found receipts for items that suggested she was involved with someone else, including a note about buying a birthday card for someone named Greg. That discovery marked the beginning of the end for John, but for Michele, it was the beginning of something new. Greg represented exactly what she had been seeking: financial stability, social status, and a man who seemed capable of providing the luxurious lifestyle she craved. Michele moved into Greg's mansion, and they began living together as a couple. They hosted frequent parties, drove matching Mercedes-Benz, and with him reportedly paying for breast implants for her and the couple having household staffs for Michele's needs. Greg's friends and family had mixed reactions to Michele. Some thought she was good for him, and that he seemed happier than he had been in years. Others, however, had reservations. They noticed that Michele seemed more interested in Greg's wealth than in Greg himself, but these concerns were not expressed directly to Greg. In 2008, Greg and Michele decided to make their relationship official by getting married. Their marriage brought significant changes to Greg's family dynamics. His ex-wife, Kathy, was openly wary of Michele from the beginning, sensing that she was nothing but trouble, describing her as fake and a liar. Kathy's primary concern was the well-being of her daughter, Taylor. She observed that Michele seemed to resent the close bond between Greg and his daughter, and was actively trying to create distance between them. Michele, meanwhile, seemed to enjoy the lifestyle that came with being married to a successful businessman. She had access to money, lived in a beautiful home, and could afford the things she wanted. However, Michele began to feel that she deserved more than what she was getting from the marriage. She started to believe that Greg took her for granted. She also began to feel that Greg's attention was often divided between her and his daughter. Michele's jealousy escalated to an alarming degree. She invented a story that 12-year-old Taylor had a substance abuse problem. Though Greg doubted the claim, the situation took a dark turn when Michele was hospitalized for opiate ingestion. She accused Taylor of drugging her coffee. Based on this accusation, Michele spent 2 days in the hospital, and Taylor, despite no evidence against her, was sent to a rehab center. Greg and Michele eventually had a child together, a daughter named Michele. The baby seemed to bring some stability to their relationship, and Greg threw himself into planning for their family's future. He was particularly excited about a new house they were building, envisioning improvements like a custom aquarium and a swimming pool where Michele could play safely. Michele had positioned herself as Greg's bookkeeper for his IT business, giving her access to and control over their financial records. While Greg believed their business was thriving and their lifestyle was sustainable, Michele was manipulating the books to hide the true extent of their debt. Her spending habits far exceeded their income, but she managed to conceal this by adjusting the numbers Greg saw. Greg continued to work hard at his various business ventures. He was someone who believed that success required constant effort and attention. Greg had also purchased a frozen yogurt shop for Michele, partly as an investment, but also as a way to give her a business interest of her own. Michele showed little real involvement in running the establishment, treating it more as an expensive hobby than a serious business venture. They also owned a fitness facility together, reflecting their shared interest in physical training and bodybuilding. It was at one of their events that Michele met a bodybuilder, Gene Wallace, who was a friend of one of her sons. Despite the significant age difference and her marriage to Greg, Michele began what many suspected was an affair with Gene. She was discreet enough that Greg seemed unaware of any relationship between his wife and the young fitness enthusiast. And it wasn't long before those secret encounters led her to question her marriage. She started to contemplate what her life might be like without Greg. Michele began to think about what she would be entitled to if their marriage ended, either through divorce or other circumstances. She discovered that Greg had significant life insurance policies that would provide substantial financial benefits. In August 2011, Michele convinced Greg to take out a life insurance policy worth $650,000, in addition to the ones he had taken before. Greg, trusting his wife and wanting to ensure her financial security, agreed to the additional insurance. He believed he was being a responsible husband by making sure Michele would be taken care of if something happened to him. Greg and Michele continued to plan for their future. They were in the process of building a new, custom home and were scheduled to close on the property on October 12, 2011. Greg was particularly excited about the move. In the early morning hours of October 13, 2011, that dream came to an end. At approximately 4:40 a.m., a frantic call was placed to the Keller Police Department. The caller was Michele Williams, and she reported that an intruder had broken into their home and her husband had been killed. A team of officers was dispatched to the address. Upon arrival, they found Michele on the front porch in distress. Given her report of an armed intruder, their first priority was to secure the property. They conducted a thorough search of the house and the backyard, where Michele said the assailant had escaped. Inside, they found their daughter Michele still asleep on the couch unharmed. In the master bedroom, Greg was lying in bed, motionless and clearly deceased. The physical evidence at the scene immediately raised questions. Outside the bedroom's back door, which led to the yard, police located a handgun, a shell casing, and a wrench. However, there were no signs of a forced entry. The back door had scratches on it, but the lock and bolt were intact, suggesting the marks may have been made to create the appearance of a break-in. Nothing in the house had been stolen. The most telling discovery, however, was an empty container of Clorox cleaning wipes. It strongly suggested that someone had attempted to sanitize the scene. Michele was taken to the Keller Police Department for questioning. She was eager to talk, asking, "At what point do I get to answer questions about Greg?" The interrogation began around 6:40 a.m. and lasted over 5 hours. For 5 hours, she repeated her story about the home invasion. She told detectives that she and Greg had stayed up late discussing plans for their new house, and that she had eventually fallen asleep on the living room couch with their young daughter. Sometime later, she was awakened by a loud noise from the master bedroom. She said she rushed to the room to investigate and was immediately struck on the head with a metal wrench. After being knocked to the floor, she claimed to have seen a man dressed entirely in black. She watched as the intruder grabbed Greg's gun and shot him in the side of the head before fleeing the house. The detectives interviewing her, however, were skeptical. The evidence from the crime scene did not align with her narrative. They noted the absence of fingerprints on the gun, the wrench, and the door. And also a check of security cameras from neighboring homes also failed to show any unfamiliar vehicles in the area around the time of the incident, aside from a pizza delivery driver, who was quickly cleared. The detective pressed her for the truth, telling her that what she was saying did not match the scene. At one point, when the detective asked if she had cleaned anything after Greg was shot, Michele reacted strongly, screaming, "I need a lawyer, obviously. My husband is dead, and I am being blamed for it." However, as the evidence mounted against her account, the detective laid out a different scenario. He recounted a previous case he had worked on where a husband had taken his own life, and the wife, in a panic, had staged the scene to look like a murder so she could collect on his life insurance policy. He then asked Michele if something similar had happened in her home. At first, she denied it, sticking to her intruder story. But after continued questioning, her account began to change. She eventually agreed that the detective's theory was correct. She now claimed that Greg had been the one to end his own life. In her new version of events, she stated that after their late-night conversation, Greg seemed sad. She said she saw him take several Tylenol PM pills before she went to the living room with their daughter around 1 a.m. 2 hours later, around 3 a.m., she woke up and saw that Greg was still awake. He told her he did not feel well and wanted to be left alone. She then fell back asleep on the couch, only to be awakened later by the sound of a gunshot from the bedroom. She ran into the room and found that Greg had shot himself. Michele claimed she panicked, not wanting their daughter to grow up knowing her father had died by suicide. She decided she had to make it look like a murder. She wiped Greg's hands with the Clorox wipes to remove any gunshot residue, then wiped the gun before placing it on the floor near the back door. She then took a screwdriver and scratched the door to simulate a break-in. Finally, she retrieved a wrench from the laundry room and struck herself in the face with enough force to create a bruise, completing the illusion of an attack. All of this, she claimed, was done while her daughter slept soundly on the couch. When news of Greg's death by suicide reached his family and friends, they all refused to believe it. Greg's mother, Betty Middlebrooks, stated that her son was peppy and full of plans for his family just weeks before he was killed. She also noted that Greg sounded upbeat about the future the last time they spoke, and that she did not believe he would have committed suicide. Greg's ex-wife, Kathy, also found the suicide and drug story that Michele had claimed to have happened hard to believe, stating, "He wouldn't have taken an aspirin to save his life." Michele's behavior in the days following Greg's death amplified these suspicions. She wrote an $18,000 check from Greg's business account to pay her attorney's fees. She sold the frozen yogurt shop on Craigslist for $50,000 and sold his successful IT company for $8,000. Michele also began the process of collecting on Greg's life insurance policies. He had 3 separate policies totaling approximately $800,000. Crucially, each policy contained a suicide clause stating that if the insured person died by suicide within 2 years of the policy's inception, the benefits would not be paid out. All of Greg's policies were less than 2 years old. On her claim forms, Michele listed the cause of death as homicide, directly contradicting the sworn statement she had given to police. A suspicious clerk at the insurance company searched Greg's name online, learned about the circumstances of his death, and alerted the authorities. On November 3, 2011, the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office completed Greg's autopsy. The findings were conclusive. The manner of death was homicide, not suicide. The report stated that the gunshot wound was not self-inflicted, as the gun had been fired from a distance of at least 6 inches from his head. Toxicology reports also revealed the presence of a sedative in Greg's system, but it was not Tylenol PM, the substance Michele claimed he had taken. Forensic analysis of the jacket Michele wore on the night of the murder found a significant amount of gunshot residue on the cuffs and sleeves, consistent with her having fired a weapon. With this new evidence, investigators built their case. On January 9, 2012, Michele Williams was arrested outside a gym and charged with murder, tampering with evidence, and filing a false police report. Her bond was eventually set at $82,000, and she was released after 8 days in custody. While awaiting trial, Michele moved on quickly. She began a public relationship with her son's friend Gene Wallace, moved in with him, and together they opened a kettlebell fitness business. She also started going by the name Shelley Williams. Nearly 2 years after Greg's death, on October 9, 2013, Michele's trial began. The deputy chief district attorney stated that there was no DNA that links Michele to this murder, and no fingerprints on the murder weapon or gunshot residue on her hands, precisely because she'd wiped things down. He also mentioned that the Keller Police Department, being inexperienced with murder scenes, had made some mistakes in the initial investigation, including potential cross-contamination. Given the difficulties in proving an intentional murder due to the destroyed evidence, prosecutors offered Michele a plea deal. She agreed to plead guilty to deadly conduct and tampering with evidence in exchange for an 18-year prison sentence. However, she found a way to delay her sentencing. She informed the judge that she was pregnant with twins. The judge placed her on house arrest so she could give birth before beginning her sentence, and she was fitted with an ankle monitor. During her time on house arrest, Michele gave interviews to a local newspaper and a television news program. In these interviews, she proclaimed her innocence, thereby violating the terms of her plea agreement. The deal was withdrawn, and she was once again facing a murder trial. Authorities also discovered irregularities with her GPS monitor. Data from the monitor showed no movement for 26 out of 30 days in November and 23 out of 30 days in December, an obvious impossibility. It was later confirmed that during this time, she had been working at a strip club and even taking a secret beach vacation with her boyfriend, Gene Wallace. Furthermore, she could not provide the name of any doctor she had seen for her supposed pregnancy. When she appeared in court in January 2014, she was not pregnant, claiming she had suffered a miscarriage. The judge revoked her bond, and she was returned to jail to await her trial. The trial of Michele Williams began on September 23, 2014. The prosecution presented a compelling case built on forensic evidence and witness testimony. Among the most powerful witnesses was Michele's own son, Andrew. According to Andrew's testimony, Michele told him that her original story about the intruder was the truth and that she had only confessed to the suicide story because the police had pressured her into it. She then tried to enlist his help in a bizarre scheme. She told him she believed Greg's ex-wife, Kathy, was responsible for the murder but had no way to prove it. She asked Andrew to help her manufacture evidence by purchasing a sweatshirt, firing a gun while wearing it to get gunshot residue on the fabric, and then planting it in Kathy's car. After planting the evidence, he was to make an anonymous call to the police. He also told the court that she had later suggested that his brother, Lee, might have been the killer, a moment that led him to sever contact with her. Lee also testified, stating that his mother had bragged to him about being able to remove her ankle monitor. Another particularly disturbing finding was that, while in Denver with Greg, Michele had purchased a book from Paladin Press. This book contained information on assassination, changing identities, killing techniques, and even poisons. These findings suggested premeditation rather than a spontaneous act or a cover-up of a suicide. Bank records also revealed that while they had as much as $110,000 in bank accounts in January 2011, this amount had dwindled to just $1,000 by October of the same year. This was despite Greg earning approximately $850,000 in the 10 months leading up to his death. The financing for their new home was also fraudulent, using a Capital One account with altered account numbers to secure the loan. The prosecution painted a picture of Michele as a woman who had married Greg for his money and lifestyle, facing mounting financial pressure and the potential collapse of their lavish lifestyle, had murdered Greg to collect on a life insurance policy. After a 6-day trial and 7 hours of deliberation, on September 29, 2014, the jury found Michele Williams guilty of 1 count of murder and 1 count of tampering with evidence. She was sentenced to 60 years in prison and will not be eligible for parole until she has served at least 30 years. In a heartfelt impact statement, Greg's mother, Betty Middlebrooks, addressed Michele directly, saying, "You destroyed your family as well as ours. Greg loved and trusted you with his business and his life. Now, Greg is gone and he'll never see his daughters grow up.